Hi everyone, Jerry here, the Poor Historian, and I am sitting here next to a mock-up of a potential Japanese exhibit here at the Swordsmanship Museum and Academy, which you should follow and like on Facebook and check out their website if you haven't done so yet. The exhibits aren't open to the public yet. This is just a proof of concept, but it really got me thinking about a topic that I've wanted to share with the world, the martial arts communities around the world, the HEMA and otherwise. Though specifically this would be aimed at the HEMA community, but I also want to share my insight with anyone who might be interested. So HEMA, to me, no longer stands for historical European martial arts, and specifically the emphasis is on the E, the European. There are so many HEMA-focused interests in historical and cultural combat for nations far outside European or even European influence. I could arguably see how, for example, American saber manuals would count as HEMA, European, because they are under the influence of the European countries and originate from them. But we see such incredibly growing interest in concepts like historical Chinese martial arts, historical African martial arts, and even Native American martial arts as well. And some of you might have even seen my Aztec Makwawit combat interpretation videos from a few years back. All of these are combat systems, or at least interpretations of combat systems, that are exclusively not European and have very little, if any, influence or changes to their system based on European influence. And so I think the term HEMA, standing for European martial arts, is outdated, and people will argue the whole, well, what about WMA, Western martial arts, and nonetheless that still contradicts what we're going for. I like to just continue using the word HEMA, but maybe E doesn't stand for European. Maybe it stands for Earth, or everyone. So, in any case, it is a wonderful martial arts system that I am heavily involved with and have nothing but respect for, and I think it's time for us to broaden our horizons and jump on board this interest in non-European combat systems. And if you know me, I absolutely love ruining people's fun by their own misconception and misuse of history. And being in the US, there's quite a lot of what we like to call Japanese fanboys, where they take the idea of the samurai, probably picked up in old samurai movies or anime, and run with it without realizing that there's definite truth behind it. Now, I would love to point out, or a few years ago, I would have loved to point out the flaws in this logic, but I didn't have any sort of backing to go on. I hadn't read any period sources back then, so I thought, well, you know what? Let's do it. Let's dive into it. Let's see if there are any historical manuals and translations of these manuals that I can learn from and learn the changes of Japanese swordsmanship. To see if I actually am going to disprove these folks, I want to be able to have a strong backing to do so. And so I dived into the world of translated Japanese combat manuals. And this goes far beyond the iconic Book of Five Rings, Gorin no Sho by Miyamoto Musashi. That's a horrible sword manual. It's mostly philosophy or making fun of other schools, and then one of those rings is actually about technique, and there's barely anything in there. But that is the most common one. However, diving into it, I have found some amazing translations, and many of these come from, let me rephrase that, not many, a very few of them come from the era of or slightly after the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, where Japan experienced almost constant conflict, and it was the era before many of these martial arts, the origins, were redefined in what a martial art is. And it was very insightful to me, especially someone who was under the impression that Kendo, Kenjutsu, and many of the other martial arts, or all of the other martial arts that claim historical tradition or historical lineage, is just that. It's tradition, not historical, and had gone through centuries of modification from the wartime martial arts of the Sengoku Jidai to where it is today. And so I like getting rid of that modern filter. I like seeing exactly how it was back in the day, and I found some of these fantastic manuals. I've read through most of these, but I am taking time to focus on building up the museum for now. But I was under the pleasure of teaching a 2-part Japanese historical martial arts class last summer, and I wanted to introduce you to some of my favorite books that I used during that class. The first 2 are these right here, and these are the foundation that I taught my level 1 class on, which was the Katana in 2 hands. Now, the reason I'm showing you 2 of them is because these are 2 different translations of the same manual. The manual being the Heiho Kadensho, which was the originating document of the Yagyu Shinkage-ryu school of Japanese swordsmanship. These are 2 different translations because the section of this book which focuses on the techniques rather than the philosophical mindset, which is a whole different world in terms of historical combat, I was focusing specifically on the techniques, though it's not a complete swordsmanship system if you don't take in the philosophy behind it as well. In any case, the technique section of both these books were, you could tell that it wasn't what the original author, Yagyu Munenori, was going for, nor the artist that depicted these techniques in the 1700s. So what I was able to do is take the translation of Hiroki Sato and the translation of William Scott Wilson, which is fascinating because they had 2 different inputs from it, and find what I assumed in my interpretation of what Yagyu Munenori was actually trying to pass down. William Scott Wilson is a translator of historical Japanese martial arts texts and swordsmanship texts, whereas Hiroki Sato was a practitioner of modern-day Shinkage-ryu, and so they both had filters or incomplete pictures, and by working together we were able to put together a fairly interesting class that, yes, has very, very heavy differences between European longsword that a lot of HEMA practitioners are used to. Don't believe what you see on that meme that keeps circling the internet where they're comparing, the different sword guards of Kendo, the Jodan, Shudan, Gedan, comparing them to the European guards of Wontag, Langbort, and Alba. They're totally different. There's a whole philosophical difference behind it. However, I found that this book was not a very good one to start with for learning Japanese historical swordsmanship. And I found a new one that I'll introduce to you at the end here, but I want to show you what I did do for level 2, and I'm not going to lie, capitalizing on the popularity of Musashi is definitely something that should be looked into because it's more than just the popularity. This particular translation, as far as I've been able to find, by the way, translated by Alexander Bennett, was the only English translation not of just the Gorin no Sho Book of Five Rings, but of every other manual on swordsmanship that Musashi wrote on. And there were at least 5 of them, and I think there was a few other translated documents that were relevant to it. And they're all in this book, and this book is ludicrously affordable on eBay, somewhere around $12 or $15, or not eBay, Amazon, $12 or $15. Highly recommend it, because not only are they translated, but they also compare and contrast the different manuals that Musashi wrote, because each of those manuals changes the foundational information of what Musashi was trying to get at with his swordsmanship. One of those manuals is actually just eight years after the Battle of Sekigahara, and so you can tell that there was some significant military influence from that one. This was the foundation of Japanese level 2, and it needed a bit of refinement. I didn't really have, it was kind of like a pick and choose, and the reason being because all of these manuals had different techniques that I felt were important to realize the system of Musashi. However, I know that that's very disjointed. So if I ever get around to doing Japanese historical swordsmanship classes again. I will definitely be reworking the level 2. However, I want to introduce you to that translation that I found before that I didn't bring up, and that is, here it is, The Sword Scroll, Way of the Scroll, by Yamamoto Kansuke. This is phenomenal translation. Now, this was not, the actual work in here is phenomenal. It has these silhouette images all over the place, as well as these these little descriptions of the translations, and each of those translations describes not just the physical motion or body of the sword or of the wielder, but also the mindset that they should be in. The foundation of this book is just variations on 3 different guards, each of which having a front and back version, and they are the standard Jodan, Chudan, and Gedan that you see nowadays. But each one has a different mindset that the combatant should be in, and I find that it's so fascinating. So when I do reteach Japanese historical swordsmanship, this book is going to be the absolute foundation of level 1, the introduction to swordsmanship, because it shows what on the surface might be basic level 3 guards, especially to a HEMAist's perspective, but getting into the mindset and use of each of these guards. Each of the guards have multiple variations based on your mindset and how you use that mindset to gain an advantage in combat. So in any case, aside from this video being an introduction to 3 of my favorite historical Japanese translations, it's also an encouragement for you guys who study historical swordsmanship to go out there and try to do your own research, because it's on the surface very similar to what HEMA does traditionally, which is the Germanic style tradition of swordsmanship, but you can expand your horizons, go far beyond that. And there's even more translations of books such as these that are translations of modern martial arts. We have this one, for example, a bow staff manual that was written in the 20s, I believe, and then translated. And then also this manual, which is a kendo manual from the early 1900s, translated again. And those are fascinating because it really shows the change of Japanese swordsmanship over the years, adaptation of Western ideas, and how the rigid structures of the Edo period really influenced martial arts when compared to the pre-Edo, or slightly post-Edo, or post to the beginning of Edo, manuals that show a more battlefield, more fluid, and less rigidity as a almost ritualistic combat. So it's very, very, very fascinating. A special shout out to Eric Shahan, who translates these manuals, just dozens, by the dozens. Go on Amazon and look up Eric Shahan, and just see all the works that he's translated, and he still flies under the radar. Where we have translations of similar texts in the HEMA world by Jeffrey Forgang, by Guy Windsor, and or at least interpretations of it, and Eric Shahan does the exact same thing for Japanese martial arts, not just swordsmanship, but also jujitsu and many other systems as well, and is as far as I had not heard of him until I started looking up historical Japanese works, and I think that his work and his dedication to these translations should be more well known. So in any case, check those out, and I highly, highly recommend, if you are part of a club or if you are a historical martial artist, please try historical Japanese. I'm not talking about kendo, and I'm not talking about any of the modern systems that claim to be more akin to Bushido or the samurai way. Those are more of a mental thing, as like a philosophical association with it. It's not truly historical. Is that Koryu? I have to remember the term. I hate doing that. I hate doing it on film where I can't remember the term. But in any case, these are truly historical translations of the manuals in the exact same image of what HEMA does, and I highly recommend you pick one up. Fairly inexpensive. I'll post links in the video description, and we'll go from there. With that, folks, I hope you take this to heart and broaden your horizons, and I will see you guys next time.